Hello, and welcome to Cutting Through. I'm Mitchell Plitnick. The latest scandal to hit Israel, at least on the international scale, is the video that was released by the Minister of Public Security, Itamar Ben Gvir, showing his abuse of activists that Israel illegally kidnapped on the high seas, who were part of a flotilla that was heading towards the Gaza Strip with food, medical supplies, and other uh, basic sustenance that the people of Gaza either have none of or just not nearly enough of. That was the crime these people committed. The crime Israel committed was to intercept the flotilla long before it was anywhere near Israeli waters and pull the activists off of their boats, imprison them, abuse them, leave their belongings on the the ships that they just abandoned at sea, which is also against maritime law, and drag them to Israel, where they have since been deported to Turkey and then presumably back to their home countries. The video that Ben Gvir released showed the sort of treatment that he doled out to them, showed the activists tied up hand and foot, bent over on their knees with their faces on the ground, clearly in a humiliating position. Reports are they were in that position for, in some cases, hours, which, as you can imagine, is quite painful. Here's the statement from the uh, the civil rights organization in Israel, Adalah. This is an Israeli organization, by the way, and I'm quoting from them. Following the illegal interception of the flotilla in international waters and the illegal abduction of over 400 activists from around the world, Israel is employing a criminal policy of abuse and humiliation against activists seeking to confront Israel's ongoing crimes against the Palestinian people. These events come after Abdullah documented similar patterns of ill treatment against activists in previous flotilla missions, for which Israel faced zero accountability. Abdullah attorneys, along with a team of dedicated volunteers, entered the port facilities in recent hours, are providing legal consultation to them, and will continue to demand their immediate and unconditional release. The international community must take urgent measures to protect the flotilla members against this brutal and illegal conduct by Israeli officials. So let's be clear here. This is what Israel did to a bunch of unarmed activists who, yes, were trying to break the blockade of Gaza. And so you would expect, whether Israel's entitled to do so or not is a different question, but you would expect that Israel would intercept them, try to stop them, prevent them from getting into Gaza. That does not give Israel the right to board these ships in international waters, does not give Israel the right to imprison these activists when they had done nothing wrong yet. By the time when you're intercepting them in international waters, you can't claim they have done anything wrong. You can't, in any system of law and order, you cannot arrest people for things they might do. You have to arrest them for things they did or are in the process of doing. One can argue they're in the process of breaking the siege of Gaza, but uh, breaking the siege of Gaza is in this case a humanitarian mission, but even beyond that, you don't get to arrest people on the high seas who do not pose a threat because you think they're going to a place you don't want them to go. If they try to get into Gaza, actually try to get into them, that is a different debate. It's still a debate. It is not at all clear that Israel has the right to stop humanitarian activists from delivering humanitarian supplies that Israel is illegally keeping from the people of Gaza, no matter what they try to tell you. This is a point that has been lost in recent months since the so-called ceasefire was imposed in Gaza, and it certainly has been buried since the start of the war with Iran. But Israel is continuing to impede access and distribution of humanitarian aid to the people in Gaza. Not as maybe as bad as it was when the war was in it was full blown, but it's still happening. People in Gaza are still on the brink of starvation. They're not starving the way they were, but they're still not getting the food that and supplies that they need. Um, Even if they're getting food, they're not getting adequate medical supplies. They're not getting adequate sanitary supplies either. Things like diapers, feminine hygiene products. These things are not available in Gaza in sufficient numbers. And that's what the people on the flotilla were bringing. The Global Sumud Flotilla organization issued a statement. We're talking about, quote, the testimony about widespread abuse, assault, and torture, rubber bullets fired at close range, tasers to the face and upper body, stun grenades thrown into groups of detainees, stress positions held for hours, as I mentioned, under permanent bright light, hijabs forcibly removed. Let me stop there. I want you to stop and consider what it would look like, what it would be like, what kind of a scandal we would hear about if an observant Jewish person, Jewish man in this case, it would have to be, well, not necessarily, not necessarily a man, depending on what kind of what denomination, Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, Reconstructionists that they were. But let's just say a Jewish person was forced to remove their kippah. And let's go further. Let's call them an Orthodox Jewish person who is wearing tzitzis, who is wearing the fringes, I guess is what people call them in English, and that was ripped from under their shirt. Can you imagine the response to that? Imagine. Um, but taking off, forcibly removing a Muslim woman's hijab. Have you heard about it? Has there been a scandal? Has there been a headline about this? Let me move back into the flotilla statement, the Global Sumud Flotilla's statement. Uh, Hijab forcibly removed, as well as various forms of sexual violence, including humiliating strip searches, sexual taunting, groping and pulling of genitals, and multiple accounts of rape. What are we supposed to do with that? They all lying? Is that what this is? I mean, the pro-Israel crowd is wonderful, coming up with most outlandish conspiracy theories about how the entire world is anti-Semitic and every single thing that's said about Israel is just a lie, and everyone is lying and saying that things aren't true. If it's not, I can tell you right now, their stories will fall apart pretty quickly because they're going to have everybody, every pro-Israel person in the world picking over them and trying to find contradictions. So we'll know if they're lying, and I don't think that's what we're going to find out. Um, on what they were calling the torture boat, they said that the activists were detained. The activists were processed one by one and taken into darkened containers where groups of Israeli commandos brutalized them one by one. Here is one person uh, describing the moment of entry. Um, Sorry, this is difficult to read. He throws me into a container that is dark, and all of a sudden I hear "Welcome to Israel," and I start getting hit, like first on the head, second hit in the ribs, then I fall, then they kick me, and I'm hearing people screaming, and all of a sudden people stop screaming, and I don't see anything, and I don't know what's going to happen. This is just terrorizing people on top of torturing them. Another testimony. This is Adrian Berthel from France, described being singled out for targeted humiliation and beating after Israeli soldiers noticed that he was wearing nail polish and therefore made assumptions about his sexuality. So we get the homophobia that singles out people that are at least perceived as queer. I hate to tell you, this is 2026, and um, uh, young men uh, wear all sorts of makeup and various decorations in their body that used to be considered, you know, anathema, anti-masculine. Men wear lots of this stuff without necessarily being gay, without necessarily even being non-binary. They can still consider themselves male. That could be their gender identity, or they could be non-binary. Um, those sorts of assumptions, I think, reflect a misogyny and homophobia that supposedly Israel is this island in the Middle East that doesn't have such things. This is what we hear all the time. Another woman, Veronica Otero, says, I can say that all were in many ways abused. Now, Veronica says that she was watching pretty much everybody getting processed. She was, for whatever reason, in a position to see it. She says that they were all in many ways abused. Not one single person walking with nothing. Among them were 36 fractures, many broken ribs, torso, shoulders, and back. People were in agony. People were not breathing due to the broken ribs. At least this is a quote now from the statement. At least 12 sexual assaults have been documented on that torture boat alone. This was on the way to the detention facility at Ashdod. Um, 12 sexual assaults documented there, including anal rape and forcible penetration by a handgun. I want you to imagine for a minute how terrifying that is, not to mention brutal and horrific. But think about how scary that is. Think about, you know, I remember one time going to Israel years ago, getting in a cab, and I was heading to East Jerusalem from Ben Gurion Airport, and so since I was going to East Jerusalem, I made sure to get a cab with an Arab driver because for one thing, to going to East Jerusalem, there's no guarantee a Jewish driver would take me there. Um, and so I get in the car and we're driving, and we get to a checkpoint. Soldier stops us. Soldier was, barely 18, and he's asking the driver all these various questions and getting his ID and looking over. And while he's doing it, I notice his gun is leaning against the car. He's just leaning it, pointing at me with his hand on it, and he was sweating. And I'm thinking to myself, what happens if this guy's hand slips? Now, I had that experience, and then I think about what it must be like to be violently penetrated by a handgun. What happens if that hand slips? How terrifying is that? And that's not by accident. That's not somebody, in my case, I think the kid was just being thoughtless and was probably new and wasn't really thinking about what he was doing. This case, that's not what that is. That is intentional terror. Israeli soldiers, according to the statement, tased volunteers in the face, neck, and body. The strikes multiply with each new group that is brought in. Multiple volunteers report being photographed during strip searches and guards laughing throughout. This is just pure abuse. At the Ashdod port, the statement continues, the violence continued. Beatings, broken ribs, sexual humiliation with severity that far exceeded the videos posted by National Security Minister Itamar Ben Gvir that sparked global and diplomatic outrage. Participants were subject to torture, extreme stress positions, and prolonged interrogations. Now, I will guarantee you, there will be what people will call an investigation of some kind. The various embassies that are involved here, and we're going to get to that in a minute, someone will look into it, and they're going to come out with not being able to verify these accounts, or maybe verifying some of the more minor details. That's a sadly familiar story, not just when it comes to Israel, when it comes to certainly sexual assault and many crimes to which there's no witnesses, and that is also very hard to come up with physical evidence because, especially in a case like this, it's going to be covered up. So we're going to end up in a he said, she said on some level of this. Um, but, again, I'm sure Israel's defenders will say, because they all hate the Jews, they're going to be lying. Well, this Jew believes them. I don't think they hate them, and I don't see any reason that people would make this stuff up. They don't need to. So let's look at some of the governmental reactions. The UK, Italy, Poland, Spain, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Portugal, New Zealand, Canada, and Australia. Okay, so these are all Western countries. Um, they all summoned Israel's ambassadors to their respective countries. Um, you know, the language of diplomacy is irritating as hell when things like this happen because they summon the ambassadors for clarifications and for me what's the ambassador going to clarify? Yeah, they were tortured, or no, we would never do that. I mean, who cares what they say? um and this is supposed to be, the opportunity, of course, to communicate your displeasure to the country, but in the end, all of these countries will continue doing business with Israel as if nothing happened. And that's where the problem lies. There is still no accountability. You can summon an ambassador. You can make a statement, and they did. The UK Foreign Office called this a violation of, quote, the most basic standards of respect and dignity for people, and they demanded explanation over the activists' treatment and detention conditions. Whoopee. How is that going to deter? Certainly not just Israel, but certainly somebody like Ben Gvir is not going to be deterred by this. He's not going to be deterred by the fact that his own figures in his own government, the foreign minister, Gideon Sa'ar, even the prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, said, "Oh, you've made Israel look bad. You've hurt the state of Israel. You have made us, look terrible," and then turn around to the reporters and say, "This does not reflect our values," which is nonsense. And I'm going to discuss that more in a minute too. But um, none of these words do not deter repeating this behavior. Um, Now, I'll contrast that a little bit. The Spanish foreign minister condemned what he called the monstrous, inhumane, and disgraceful treatment of the detained flotilla activists. The difference is that Spain actually does, at least to some degree, try to take action. Spain has tried to get the European Union, for example, to follow its own laws, invoke Article 2 of its trade agreement with Israel, and stop doing business with Israel because of its human rights violations. The EU is not cooperating with that, but Spain is trying to take some action. So when I hear these words from the Spanish foreign minister, yeah, in and of themselves, they don't mean much, but Spain does actually try to back this up with some action. So there's a little more to that. And that's what is required from those other 10 countries that I mentioned. By contrast, you have Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney denouncing Israel's, quote, abominable, unquote, treatment of activists aboard the Gaza aid flotilla and demanded that Tel Aviv ensure the, quote, safety and security of Canadians. I mean, who are we kidding here? There's a few points that we need to make about this. And the first one I think is the one that's reflected in Carney's words, which is this selective outrage. These governments are silent about the treatment of Palestinians, which is just as well documented as the treatment of these activists aboard the flotilla. There are videos of treatment of Palestinians. We have seen what Palestinians look like after a few months in an Israeli prison. We have seen emaciated, obviously beaten people over and over. Not to mention the video, of course, of the rape at Itamar prison. We have heard numerous accounts from former Israeli guards, soldiers, etc., who came out and said what they saw, in some cases, what they did. Faced no accountability, but they said it. We know it happened. I mean, there's just as much documentation there, but we don't hear even these empty words. We rarely hear from these leaders. Now, of course, it's reasonable, and one can expect that any country is going to be more vocal about the treatment of its own citizens than the treatment of other people. Of course, that's true. But they themselves are partners with Israel. It's not like they are disinterested, bystanders who just happen to see something, that some crime committed against Palestinians. They're part of it. So, there's a limit to how much you can excuse them for not speaking out about that when they speak out about their own citizens. But I want to go to someplace else here. This is really important, and I think it's key. And I've made a point here of talking about Itamar Ben Gvir and Benjamin Netanyahu. And a lot of people are right now sort of jumping on those guys and saying this is Israel. Netanyahu is Israel. Ben Gvir is Israel. If you're saying that, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. I'm sorry to say. It's, you'll find many people who are condemning Ben Gvir right now and forgetting about people like, Sar and Netanyahu. There are people in Israel who are appalled by what they saw Ben Gvir doing. They are. They're bothered by it. Some are bothered for the same reason Gideon Sar said, that you're making Israel look bad. But there are people who don't want Ben Gvir to do these things, period, to Palestinians, let alone to European and American activists. Um, the idea that all Israelis are Ben Gvir is just not true. Ben Gvir represents the most extreme of Israel. And that's kind of the point. Israel has become the most extreme version of itself. And while many Israelis would say, oh, we should not do what Ben Gvir did, they're also silent about the day-to-day treatment of Palestinians. Some of them, are silent. I think many Israelis, like many people in the West, are silent because they don't see it every day the way Ben Gvir just publicized it. They don't actually see it with their eyes. They know what's going on, and they're not going to speak out about it, partially because it's too hard for them. It's too risky, this and that, but also partially because especially after October 7th, but in general, the dehumanization of Palestinians and the characterization of Palestinians as a deadly enemy who all want to kill Jews for no other reason than that. I mean, why would Palestinians have anything against Israel? After the wonderful way Israel has treated them for the last, and it goes back beyond 78 years ago. It goes back 100 plus years. Um, so on the one hand, yes, they're not Ben Gvir in the sense that they don't celebrate torture and abuse and humiliation of Palestinians. They're not, but overwhelmingly, Israelis are not motivated to act against it either. That being said, there are plenty of Israelis who do act against it, and it's important, And of course, Adallah is not an Israeli Jewish organization, but there are other organizations that are mostly, if not all, Israeli Jewish, be it B'Tselem, be it the Public Committee Against Torture in Israel, be it Gisha, be it, a whole bunch of the Association for Civil Rights in Israel. There's many of them. There are people who support those organizations who don't necessarily work for them. So, why do I say this? This is no, not all Israelis are blah, blah, blah. We've heard that all before, but it is important. And the reason it's important is because there is an election coming up. And it is very, very possible, though by no means certain, that Netanyahu will lose, that Ben Gvir will be gone. So who will come in? Naftali Bennett will come in. Yair Lapid will come in with him. And it's important to stress that Ben Gvir is, he is much more upfront and extreme. And while it's true that the Bennetts and the Lapids, and before them, the Ehud Olmerts, the Ehud Baraks, the Ariel Sharons, and yes, even Yitzhak Rabin, who famously in the First Intifada gave the order to break the Palestinians' arms and legs, specifically meaning not those who were taking up arms, specifically meaning nonviolent protesters. That's who he was talking about when he gave that order. Um, these people are not as extreme as Ben Gvir. They are more visibly moderate. But underneath they might, commit the same crimes just with less brazenness and maybe with a little bit less joy in their brutality. But the suffering of Palestinians will go on. It's not going to be eased by Naftali Bennett. It's not going to be eased by Yair Lapid or Gadi Eisenkot or certainly Benny Gantz or any, not really politically relevant anymore, but nonetheless, it doesn't do us, it's not going to be helpful to try to portray Israel as Ben Gvir. That's not going to be helpful because it'll be too easy after Netanyahu and Ben Gvir are out of office and out of power to then say, no, 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 look, you're just picking on Israel. You're being mean. You're again portraying Israel as the worst thing ever. And I think again, we need, there is this argument. Right? There's this argument out there. Oh, you say Israel's the only one that ever commits. No, Israel's not the only one that commits these crimes, and Israel's not the only one that commits them with impunity. I just was relaying a story the other day about a commander in Sudan who literally was filmed killing civilians, executing civilians, and has now been put back in the field. I mean, you can look at what goes on in Sudan. You can look at what goes on in North Korea, Mali, Russia, so many different places to see just the most appalling human rights violations. The difference, here is the difference. The difference is that we are not complicit in Sudan's crimes, at least certainly not as directly as we are in Israel's. We're certainly not complicit in North Korea's crimes or Russia's crimes. Um, we are complicit in what Israel does. And Israel's no better than any of those other countries in terms of its criminal behavior. We can talk, people look at, the war in Iran and say, why are you defending Iran? I'm not defending Iran. Iran last year, the number of executions zoomed through the roof. Iran is a totalitarian government. That doesn't mean we should be waging war on it. It doesn't mean that because the government is not nice, that we should be bombing the hell out of the Iranian people and making their lives even worse. The issue is, what can we do? We don't have the ability to stop North Korea, for example, from dissuading it from its authoritarian behavior against its own citizens. We do have the ability to dissuade Israel from what it does to the Palestinians because Israel can't do it without us. It can't do it without the United States and without Europe. It can't. It can't do it economically, it can't do it politically, and it can't do it militarily. There is no war in Iran without the United States. That's why there hasn't been one up until now. Netanyahu and other Israeli leaders have wanted this war for decades. They didn't get it until there was a president in Washington who was stupid enough to do it. Okay. Every other president heard the same arguments from Israel and said no. That's why we single out Israel, not because Israel is worse than everybody else, but because we are complicit with what Israel does. The fact that I say Israel is not worse than everybody else is not in any way a defense of Israel. It is a sad commentary on the world we live in, that Israel is so typical of it, and that it's abominable genocidal behavior, it's apartheid reality, it's settler colonialist history, are not special, are not unique. What is special is our ability to do something about it. And that's why it is important. So I'm sitting here saying why, we shouldn't say that Ben Gvir is Israel, but we should absolutely say Ben Gvir is what Israel is doing. What you saw in that video, Ben Gvir is doing 10 times worse to the Palestinian prisoners, the thousands upon thousands of Palestinian prisoners that are held in Israel for years at times without not let alone without a trial, but without even charges being brought against them. These are the points that need to be hammered home. And these are the things that are so crucial to remember and to keep in mind and to keep in perspective. Because I'm pretty sure that even as horrible as the treatment was, that the activists, the wonderful activists on the Global Sumud Flotilla went through, as horrible as that was, I'm sure every one of them will tell you, focus on what's happening to the Palestinians because it's much worse. So I'll leave it there. If you thought this video was valuable, please like, please share, please subscribe if you can. If you can support the work of Cutting Through so you can get more of this sort of analysis. There's links in the description and links on your screen for how to donate, how to become a paid subscriber. If you can't do those things, becoming a free subscriber and sharing with your friends is also really, really helpful and deeply appreciated. Leave it there, and I will be talking to you soon.